Hi there, it's Louise with you of Timeless Craft Mama, and today I'd like to share a project for Scrap the Boys, and it's inspired by their December mood board. I really liked this mood board because it's kind of traditional, but it's not the typical red and green, and it's still got that Christmas feel. So I've entitled my layout Naughty, Nice, Cute, and I'm going to show you how I created this page. So the first thing I've done is I've picked a few supplies and some photos from my stash and just using the colours in that mood board. Now because they are those traditional colours, I've gone with a black and white photo just to be able to work with whatever I create on the page and still have my photos match quite well. The first step I'm going through and doing here is I've trimmed my white cardstock and I've picked a red cardstock to use in the background, and I'm just putting some watercolour paint onto that cardstock. So I haven't prepped it in any way. There's no gesso, there's no matte gel, anything down on there. It's just plain white cardstock, and you can see that the watercolour paint does sit quite happily on there. The next step is to apply some washi tape, and then I'm going to use this stencil and some Colour Blast Snow White paste to just give that little bit of Christmas sparkle. So I'm using the star stencil because, I mean, let's face it, Christmas is, notorious for stars. So I thought that that would be a good stencil to use. Now that I'm happy with where the background is with this, I'm going to start to build a cluster to highlight my photos, and I've gone with a vertical line of photos this time. It's not something I've done often in the past, so I really am quite happy with the way this has turned out. Now I've picked out some papers too that fit with the colours of the mood board, and I'm just going to build that cluster ready to use on my page. Now of course when I'm building a cluster I'm going to pop a doily in the background here. It seems to be my sort of go-to at the moment, is to use a doily as either part of my cluster or in my background. And in this case I've just chopped it in half and used half either side on the angles of that particular cluster. So I'm just adding a few more things, a couple of banners here, a couple of extra layers of the paper. And at this point, I'd had the idea to use this vertical line of photos, but I wasn't quite sure how I was going to title the page or how I was going to build a cluster of not a photo, but of embellishments as such. So I sort of just winging it here until I decide how I want this final layout to look. Now I have taken, I felt that my cluster didn't have enough depth in it, so I'm just painting some card that I've ripped off a layer with some white gesso, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to heat emboss that in that turquoise colour just to again add a little bit of interest. And I quite like how this has turned out. It's sort of got a little bit of a grungy feel, but it's not messy grunge, if that makes sense. So it still has a nice interest to it, and you can see when it gets into the background of the page, it just adds another element of interest into that cluster. So I think that this is probably something I should do a little bit more often. Yes, it took some time to tear that layer of paper away from the card, but it's certainly that corrugate mixed with the gesso and then with the embossing powder over it as well. It really does add such an interesting element to that particular cluster. So I finally decided what I wanted to do to make this layout have that more appealing aesthetic, and I've also gone and adhered that cluster together off camera just so you didn't have to watch that. I've gone ahead and added some banners and created a couple of little elements that I'm going to pop on the page. So starting with some cotton just to again add that little bit of interest. I've got my Naughty Nice Cute tag. I've also got a Merry Christmas tag there as well, and some more cotton. I've used a flare button from Cocoa Vanilla Studio, and basically the final stages now is just some journaling and those last little elements. So I really think that this layout is certainly something a bit different for me with that vertical cluster and the background piece as well, but I'm quite pleased with the way it's turned out. It's the colours really are quite striking, especially with those black and white photos, and I really like the background and those cardboard elements that I've altered as well. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you're enjoying my 12 days of YouTube projects. Don't forget to subscribe and of course check out my other videos. Thanks for watching.